So our next fireside chat is Revolutionising Education, a fireside chat on supply chain transformation in the education sector. My guest is Sean Plunkett, Global Procurement Category Director at Springer Nature. Welcome for Sean, please.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, what I'm always keen to do when we are looking at a specific sector is making sure we always remember there's plenty to learn across all sectors from anywhere in particular. So that is something we'll be referencing as we go along. But we'll start with an obvious one about what the specific challenges are when it comes to the education sector.
Yeah, I think just take everyone back a little bit. When I first joined about 7 years ago, we had a very traditional book publishing model that was all around Asia sourcing. So most publishers print in Asia, and guess what? That was driven by low unit cost of manufacturing. And again, about lessons learnt, that's not unusual in most sectors. A lot of sectors decided Asia was the right place to print. It was all about lowest landed cost. The reality was, and I saw that very quickly, was that our service levels were extremely poor because we were doing it on forecasts that were perhaps 9 months old. So we'd literally do a forecast 9 months ago, build some stock, as I used to say, print, store and pray that we'd actually sell it. And that was pretty much the traditional model. Now, Macmillan was a 180-year-old business, and I reckon we'd been running that for about 180 years. I'm joking, but it felt like that. And we had a whole sourcing team in Asia. They were doing an amazing job, so it seemed, buying paper. They were buying it better than everybody else. And I said, well, why is it when I've joined, I've had to scrap 3 million books in the first few weeks I've joined, and it's had no impact on sales? And yet you've manufactured all that content. Isn't that a bit of a tragedy? And if you go back to some of the modern drivers of things like sustainability, clearly this model was inherently flawed. We're also incurring massive costs in terms of freight, in terms of transporting goods all over the world. We centralised it all in a warehouse in the UK. And then everyone around the world would then order it from the UK. And if we didn't have enough stock based on that print, pray, store model, guess what? We had to air freight it just to even further add more carbon to the world's problems. So that's the sort of model I inherited. And one of the things I was keen to do was go around the world, not just because I like going around the world, but actually to talk to people and actually engage with our sales entities where they were selling our books. So our content is very much English language content for primary and secondary education. Primarily we sell it in developing countries, and those countries don't have bandwidth typically, so digital product hasn't really exploded in that sector. Most of it is still very physical. We're probably 98% physical books still, which is quite incredible in today's world. You'd think surely there's a lot of digital. There's a lot of digital, but it's supplementary content, and it's not a revenue driver as well. It's typically given away for free. So one of the things I picked up was we've got such poor service, it would be such an advantage if we could actually have much more local supply. So I started going around trying to find partners who would buy into that strategy. So printers, because they were the core skill and technical piece of the equation in the supply chain.
Well, Sean, before you get on to the new model,
okay,
let's stick a little bit to the old model and a bit of that journey. Let's not get ahead of ourselves too quickly. Apologies for cutting you off full flow. Please. So when you'd identified these problems, you've got a warehouse full of books that you don't need, the Pray model, as you said.
Yes.
Was there much resistance when you were picking apart the model and saying, there's really screamingly obvious problems here? Why are we doing this? Doesn't make sense. Was there much resistance to that change?
Yeah, massive resistance from sales teams, publishers, some people who create the content, and in some cases the customers, they got nervous about potentially a new model as well. So it took a lot of stakeholder engagement, as you would imagine, and buy-in. And typically in a transformation, I've found you need to get some quick wins, and you need to get some buy-in of people in particular areas who are receptive to these type of thoughts. And if you don't, you'll just die in a ditch straight away. So I was able to get, in Asia, for example, I said, we're going to pull out of China completely. We're going to go to Singapore. I found this vendor who has a complete hub model where everything is under one roof. And at first they were struggling with that concept, and I said, let's try and meet your customers. So I had the customers come and visit the actual operation. So they actually bought into it and said, wow, this is transformational compared to what we've got. And it will deliver a massive service improvement. So what we also did was do digital use of digital exploitation of digital printing. So not only could we still retain our whole catalogue down to one book. So if we had an order for one, we could print one. In the old model, we were holding stock of every single ISBN, every single title. And that was where the model was completely flawed. So I suggested we only hold stock on the A selling items, which is about 80% of the revenue. The rest, there is no inventory risk, but we could turn it round extremely quickly. So in 1 or 2 days, we could print those books and supplement those fast moving items and then ship it immediately to the customers.
Because for those less useful, for want of a better, or less in demand titles, how much stock was being carried on that?
Well, we moved from, just to give you some context, 13.5 million units of inventory down to less than 1.5 million units after the transformation. So it was quite a staggering sort of, I think it was about 87% reduction in inventory globally.
As you said, you're looking for quick wins. How quick were those wins, and how quickly did people start to wake up and realise this was a smart transformation to follow? Well,
I think within inside 12 months we had the first operation delivering, and our service levels went from probably low 80s up to 99% service level first time fill rate. So it was a dramatic change. We also saw sales improvements because we were printing locally. You could actually see the salespeople said, actually, I can go out to local ministries of education here, and nobody else is doing this globally. I can actually get a sale. You can turn it round in days. Whereas other people were still supplying from Asia, which was months. So they didn't even get on the tender list. We always were winning the tenders.
So let's look at the new model. How does that look now? The move out of China is obviously complete. Yeah. How does the new model stack up?
Yeah, so all the supply chain planning has been decentralised. So I've given total ownership to the local regions, the local sales entities. So they're closest to demand. And if they get a sales signal, I want them to make the decision, not any central planning team, say in London or in Hong Kong, as it was in the past. If they know there's a customer sale, they should be determining what inventory we need and how much we should manufacture. So they've got all full capability. All the systems have been decentralised and all the planning tools have been decentralised, and they're all integrated to our ERP SAP system now.
When you're making such a dramatic change in any industry, I guess there must always be a moment of doubt. Was there any point when you were going through this, you're thinking, this is a big change, this is pretty revolutionary? Was there any point where you were concerned, doubting yourself, or doubting the idea, or were you always pretty confident?
No, I was always 100% confident. I'd done it in other industry sectors, a similar approach, but I felt from a sustainability point of view, we would get all of those additional benefits of sustainability by implementing this type of localized strategy as well. So we virtually eliminated our freight costs, for example. We had hundreds of containers coming from Asia. That doesn't exist anymore. We print in the country in which we're selling. Our inbound freight is virtually non-existent because the warehouse is there as well. So we print and supply from the same facility.
When you're looking at those less in-demand titles, you say you can just print the one or the two or the handful. How difficult was that to implement? Because that probably goes against the normal thoughts of the quantities you normally need to do.
We also developed other strategies, procurement strategies around things like flat pricing. So that encouraged you to only print what you need. That's the trick. You don't want to have the classic print curve. Print 10,000, it's very low cost. Print 1, it's very high cost. So we had flat pricing for all our digital. So we paid a slight premium, obviously, for 1, and we paid for 100, but we got a very low price for 1. And it meant that people would only order a handful if that's what they actually had as a real sale. So we never built any inventory. So we completely eliminated the inventory by that process. The other thing we had to do, and again, this is about some of the challenges, was actually getting salespeople and publishers to say, we need to simplify the products. Now, publishers are wedded to the product, the content. When I was in the music industry, we had the same. The artist you'd expect the people like that are going to be precious about their content. So what you tend to do is have an initial product that might be highly spec'd, but immediately you de-spec. So that initial product is for the fans, for the first wave. After that, the product settles down to a relatively steady, predictable amount that you're going to sell. But that initial wave is very unpredictable. So that's the one you need to be smart on. And that's the one you can probably add value in. But after that, you immediately de-spec your product. So a lot of the covers on books, we have to de-spec if you want to do digital, because you can't do it economically still at one. You have to do some streamlining. The paper is the other thing. You've noticed probably with COVID, a lot of products have become in short supply. Paper last year was an absolute nightmare globally. And that was triggered by COVID. A lot of manufacturers up the supply chain in forests, in the pulping industry, they switched to packaging. All of the manufacturers moved to packaging because we were all at home. Guess what? You get your Amazon vehicle with that cardboard package. That's what they switched to. They didn't print on, they got out of paper. So we've got less and less paper mills who are actually making the paper we need. So we've also looked at strategic sourcing for our paper now. So we're looking at more global vendors who can offer paper and will have that long-term perspective. They want to stay in that sector and will continue. So a lot of our competitors have run out of paper. We never ran out of any paper the whole of that period. We had that strategic sourcing locked down.
Sean, one thing you touched on earlier was buy-in, when you got people to actually go to the site. Was in Singapore.
It was an example.
Yeah.
Yep.
Let's stick with that buy-in, because that's the key challenge for anyone who's trying to go through a transformation project, whether that's up to the C-suite, whether that's down to the factory floor. What advice would you have of people of trying to ensure they get that buy-in to a transformation?
I think you have to constantly communicate. You have to ensure your board is bought into the strategy. So you can't embark unless you've got full backing. You need to know you've got that backing. And as I say, you need to get some quick wins. So you need to find those friendly colleagues in your organisation who are receptive to your proposed change. And that's what I did. By travelling around the world, I found certain regions, you know what, these guys are actually going to get this. And they switched on pretty quickly. And they said, actually, we can drive revenue on the back of this. So if you know how to, the trick I found in my working life is you need to engage with people in the way that they need to be engaged. So when I was in the music industry, the first thing I'd ever go into in a music executive's office was talk about music. Never talk supply chain. Zero discussion. The supply chain conversation was the very last piece of the conversation. You couldn't help me out if I could just do this, that and that. Yeah, no problem. Do you want to come to the gig tonight? Yeah, brilliant. And that is how you move the dial with these people. You have to have that connection with what is the way they like to translate. So if I'm talking to a finance person, I've got to talk numbers. End of story. They want to know numbers, they want to know ROI, what am I going to do to the bottom line, what's my margin, whatever. That's the game they want to play. So I play that to them. And you have to play in salespeople. What can you do for me on my customers? How can you improve the service? Can you give them a better deal? Can you improve that? I could offer them a better deal. Yeah, this is brilliant. So you have to learn those tricks, I think, through your career and recognise you're a translator in supply chain to get the transformation to land, and you have to have that skill to translate to different functions in your organisation, and it's a different message, not always the same one.
Moving on to technology now, because I'm sure the technology needed to make this whole system work must have been a massive part of that transformation. How did you go about selecting the technology, implementing the technology? That's as big a job as the rest of it, it seems.
Yeah, certainly in the printing sector, which physical product obviously relies on, it was the early days of digital printing, but I could see that some of the suppliers had already thought about how this would help re-engineer the whole supply chain. And if they could do that, they would eliminate so much stock in the supply chain, but also still have the whole offering available. But they hadn't necessarily worked out how to do it economically. So it needed, I think I helped facilitate some of that conversation where I said, look, if you could commercially offer it in this particular way, like flat pricing, for example, we'll give you all the premium product with the longer print runs, and I don't mind paying a little bit more for that. but I need this as part of the offering. If I can offer the total package of our complete portfolio under one roof, I've completely optimized it. The other thing we did was complete variable costing. So everything we do, if we don't use the warehouse, I'm paying zero. In the old model, we used to run our own warehouses, but I don't have any overhead cost, anything. So if I have no volume going through there, I have no unit cost affect the P&L. So that's the trick also, is to try and move to that model, but get the vendors to come with you on that journey. So that's what I did. I had over 100 vendors when I joined 6 years ago. I've now got 10 strategic partners, and they've all bought into the strategy. Even in COVID, they were investing based on just me giving them a phone call and say, we really need more capacity, could you do that? But the other thing about it is a collaborative process. So when they were in COVID period, we made sure we paid them ahead of time. Things like that, they remember. They understand if this is a partnership. So when I've come out of COVID, they've already done the investment. So we're ahead of the curve on our competitors as well.
Okay, well, let's go to the room, see if there's any questions. There's more I want to get into, but we have a question immediately there. Thank you.
You mentioned about you don't pay if you don't use a certain amount of warehouse, etc. How do you maximise on sort of volume discounts and best pricing if you're not committing to certain volumes?
Well, you are committing to the volume with limited suppliers, so they have all of your A category items. So I've given that exclusively to that vendor. So for the whole of Asia, it's with one vendor now.
Right.
It used to be with 20 vendors. So we've still got that economy on the titles we're going to stock. And what I've asked them to do is make that investment to make all the portfolio available, but you don't make any stock unless we've got a sale.
Okay, and just following on from that, so in terms of benchmarking, so if you're just going with that sort of 10 supply base, how do you know you're maximising your cost base in terms of benchmarking and getting the best prices if you're just going with a limited supply base?
Yeah, well, we've had external consultants review our supply chain, and we are best in practice. We've seen that our stock turn for this type of industry, we've hit a stock turn of sometimes 4 or 5, which is incredible in this type of industry. Now, other industries will be way higher than that, but in an education sector, a lot of them have got 2-3 year stock, typically, in their supply chains. We've got months, maximum, maybe 3 months across that whole portfolio, and we have no stock on the others. So we're only holding 3 months stock on our fast-moving items. So the chance of you selling that is really high in your financial year, because they're the items that everyone's budgeted for. But I never make to the forecast, because I don't trust the forecast, and I don't trust it. The history tells us it's very difficult to forecast. So eliminate the problem of forecasting. Put the model in place that allows you to be very reactive. So we don't run out of stock on those key items. We're always topping up as required.
Okay, that's that kind of agility. That's the key there. Any further questions from the room? There's just one at the back there, please, Tracy.
Thank you. Just interested in the decentralised model and relying on local partners. How do you maintain or satisfy yourself that quality is going to be what it needs to be?
Well, the local regions are typically also printing themselves, so they have a local curriculum. So they will be supporting the local education system with their local printers. And what I've tended to do is partner with those same printers. So they already know that printer, and they've recommended them. So all we're doing, coming back to the other lady's point, we're consolidating that volume, not only with our more international product that we're selling globally, there's also a local constituent to that. So in Mexico, we might print 10 million books for the ministry, for public schools. We've come with another 3 million, let's say, international product. So we're leveraging that volume, and we know the quality's good with that printer. Every partner we've gone with, we'd already signed them off. They all sign up to our code of conduct. It's sustainable, it's on sustainable papers, etc. They have to sign up to that anyway. And then the books we know are typically being printed for the local teams anyway. We just added some further responsibility that they can also print our books now, so we don't need to worry about that. The next thing we've done is also go into things like bots and stuff like that. So we're automating a lot of that print process through to the printers. So we've actually got robots now who actually go through our standard price lists. They pick up all the product, they know the specification, and they send immediately off to the printer, integrated into their manufacturing systems. So that's been another stage since we started the transformation.
Okay. Anything further from the room? No, I have a couple of further questions, just looking to the future, really. When there's been such a dramatic change, is there a temptation to rest on your laurels a little bit when it's something that's acting so successfully? Where do you take this in the future?
I think supply chain is always going to be now in a constant state of flux, and you have to recognise that the volatility, the uncertainty is here to stay. You know, just because we had COVID, there'll be something else. Just because we've had the war in, Ukraine, there'll be more and more things like this. The climate impacts are enormous. We had an explosion. You may recall, some of you, the explosion in Lebanon, where the port, there was fertilizer in the port. It was like a nuclear explosion. Our warehouse was 500 meters from that explosion. Guess what? 300,000 books were destroyed in 2 seconds. But our supply chain was resilient because we had other partners in those other countries in the Middle East, and we never lost a single sale. But no, I think you have to think like that in supply chain. You've never, I think the previous speaker I was listening to, it's not about a program of work and it's finished. It's a constant evolving thing, and you have to keep people, you have to put the foot on the pedal all the time. And things like sustainability, which is at the core of this, you have to keep banging home that message that it is important. It does matter to all of us on the planet. And the more we do of this, the better. Even if it's only our small initiative, I think that's a worthy thing to be doing. And I find all the team that I work with, they buy into that now.
Okay, sure. Well, I think I speak for everyone in the room. Really enjoyed your company this afternoon. Thanks ever so much for joining us.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.